My name is Marissa, and I watched my sister slide $200 bills across a conference table and say, "Get yourself a cab home." She thought that moment ended everything for me, but it didn't. It began something she never saw coming. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or replaced by someone who was supposed to love you, please subscribe to this channel. I tell stories like this because I've lived them. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. You're not alone in this. I used to think that betrayal would sound like something breaking, glass shattering maybe, or a slammed door echoing down a hallway. But that's not how it happened for me. When my world collapsed, it didn't make a sound. It came in silence, a silence so sharp it could cut through bone. I met Caleb when I was 23. We were both broke, idealistic, and working ridiculous hours trying to make something out of nothing. He had big ideas, and I had the creative fire to match. Together, we sketched furniture designs on napkins and stayed up late piecing together the brand we would one day launch. It was never just love. It was a partnership forged through hustle, late nights, and belief in something bigger than ourselves. We built it all from scratch, our homeware business, our reputation, our life. The company grew slowly at first, then all at once, people started calling us the dream team. They saw Caleb as the face, the voice, the man with the business acumen. I didn't mind staying in the background. I liked creating more than performing. I thought we understood that balance. I thought we were in this together. Then came my sister, Tessa. She always had a way of appearing when things were good for me. It wasn't enough for her to have her own lane. She needed to be in mine, wearing my shoes, calling it hers. When her latest relationship imploded, she called me in tears, said she needed somewhere to land. I let her move into our guest house. I thought I was helping. I thought I was healing old wounds between us. I thought I was safe. I wasn't. At first, I noticed little things: her sudden interest in our work, her accidental appearances in meetings, the way she'd brush Caleb's arm or laugh too hard at his jokes. But I ignored the signs. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. I had no proof, only a slow, tightening feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. Then I got sick. It hit me the day before a showroom launch in Seattle. Nausea, fever, total exhaustion. I couldn't go. Caleb insisted he'd handle it. Tessa stayed behind to take care of me, bringing me tea and asking if I needed anything. She was almost gentle, too gentle. I should have known. When I recovered a few days later, I checked our business credit card. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to track expenses. But what I found was a trail. Dinner for two at a 5-star restaurant, champagne service at a hotel, spa treatments, all signed by Caleb, all in Seattle, all during the time I was home alone, sick in bed. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Tessa hadn't stayed behind. She'd gone with him. She'd been there with him, in my place, sleeping in rooms I'd booked, drinking from glasses I'd paid for, soaking in the life I had built. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within weeks, I was removed from the company board. My key card stopped working. Our joint accounts were frozen. They claimed I had been unstable for months, that I'd stepped away voluntarily. They moved into our main house together. Tessa redecorated using my own product line. Caleb issued a press release calling her his muse. But they didn't know everything. They didn't know Caleb had signed a prenup when we were just starting out. A document he barely read, assuming it was for financial formality. He didn't realize it made me majority shareholder, that it gave me final say over design direction, that it was still legally binding. When the final settlement meeting came, I was quiet. Tessa walked in wearing one of my designs, smiling like she'd already won. She tossed $200 across the table and told me to get a cab. It was meant to humiliate me, to erase me. Instead, It lit something inside me I thought I had lost. I didn't pick up the money. I picked up the prenup. I handed it to my lawyer, and I watched the color drain from their faces. They had tried to bury me, but I had the blueprints. I had the paper, and more than that, I had the truth. If you've ever been pushed out of your own story, remember this. Silence doesn't mean surrender. Subscribe for the next part of this journey, because what came after that $200 moment changed everything. Long before the money, before the company, before Caleb, there was just me and Tessa in a 2-bedroom rental where the wallpaper peeled and the radiators knocked all night long. She was my half-sister by blood, but in our house, there was no half about it. We shared everything: bedroom, hand-me-downs, space, silence. I was 4 years older, old enough to remember what it felt like before my dad left, old enough to remember the sound of my mother crying behind a closed door. Tessa didn't remember the hard years. She came after the chaos, after Mom started dating again, after things started to look less like survival and more like something livable. But even as a child, Tessa had a way of pulling everything toward herself. Attention, affection, time. If I got a new backpack, hers had to be bigger. If I brought home an art project, she'd spill something on it by accident before Mom could hang it up. I'd cry and Tessa would smile. Every time. I don't think I fully understood what envy looked like until I saw it in her face. My mother always said we had different strengths. I was the quiet one, the thinker. Tessa was the spark, the one who could light up a room. But lighting up a room came with shadows, and I was usually the one standing in them. Still, I tried to love her. I helped with her homework. I curled her hair for school dances. I covered for her when she snuck out late. I told myself that this was what family meant. You give and hope that one day they give back. They never do. Not like that. When I got my scholarship to design school, Tessa didn't congratulate me. She said, "Must be nice not having to pay your way." When I graduated with honors, she told people I'd studied something cute. And when I introduced Caleb at our first family dinner, she looked at him like he was something she already owned. I didn't see it then. I didn't want to. Caleb was everything Tessa wasn't. Grounded, practical, kind. He noticed details. He remembered things. When I told him about how I used to rearrange furniture in our apartment as a kid just to make it feel new, he didn't laugh. He listened. He said, "That's your gift. Seeing what something could be." That's what I thought we were doing, building something that could be more than what we had. The business started slow. Caleb handled suppliers and contracts. I handled design. We were a team, truly. And for a while, we were happy. The kind of happy that doesn't announce itself loudly but just settles in quietly like sunlight through clean windows. Tessa watched all of it from a distance. She never outright said she wanted what I had. She didn't have to. I saw it in the way she poked at Caleb, teasing him just enough to get a reaction. I saw it in the way she dismissed our company at first, then asked pointed questions once we gained traction. I saw it in the way she began showing up more often. Holidays, birthdays, Sunday brunches, always wearing something a little too tight, laughing just a little too hard. I should have trusted that old instinct, that low, persistent ache in the gut that told me she was reaching for something that wasn't hers. But I was too busy building, too busy trusting, too busy believing that maybe, just maybe, this time she'd love me instead of trying to become me. What I failed to see was that Tessa didn't want her own life. She wanted mine, piece by piece. She didn't just want Caleb. She wanted the company, the house, the recognition. She wanted the things I had sacrificed for, the nights I stayed up sketching, the deals I helped close, the team I hired and nurtured. She wanted the end result without the years of failure, fear, and fatigue. Looking back, it wasn't about love. It was about power. She had always known how to take. As a kid, it was my toys. As a teenager, it was my privacy. And now, as adults, it was my life. And just like before, she had no shame, no pause, no remorse. She had once asked me, years ago, "What's it like to be so good all the time?" I hadn't known what she meant. But now, I think she resented the way people trusted me. The way I stayed grounded when she spun out. The way I built things that lasted while she chased highs that disappeared by morning. She saw what I had and decided it should have been hers. But the thing about people who take shortcuts is that they never expect you to read the fine print. They count on your silence. They count on your collapse. What Tessa didn't count on was the part of me she never truly understood. I don't disappear. I rebuild. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It comes from distance. From the space that opens when something once solid begins to crack beneath your feet, and you pretend not to notice. That silence crept into our house weeks before I realized what it meant. At first, it was subtle. Caleb's schedule shifted. More late meetings, more early mornings. He was always catching up or meeting an investor for coffee. It wasn't like him to be vague. He had always been predictable, which is part of what made me feel safe with him. But that predictability was slipping, replaced by half smiles and tired eyes that didn't meet mine for too long. Still, I didn't question it. I blamed the business. Growth was stretching us thin. We were scaling faster than we'd expected, and that meant stress. Tension over hiring, production delays, supplier miscommunications. I told myself we were just tired, that we were still in this together. But little things kept piling up. Tessa had integrated herself into our day-to-day in ways I couldn't quite explain. She said she was just curious about what we did, how we ran things. She offered to help with marketing. "Just until you find someone," she said casually, as if her presence was temporary. But temporary became daily. She showed up at the office with coffee for the team. She asked questions about our next launch. She smiled like she belonged. I started catching her in places she shouldn't be, standing in Caleb's office while he was out, rifling through samples in the design room, asking employees what they thought of her ideas. It was invasive. It was off. But I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to sound petty. I didn't want to be the woman accusing her own sister of something I couldn't prove. I brushed it off, over and over again. One night, I walked into the living room and found Tessa and Caleb sitting too close on the couch, laughing at something on his phone. The air shifted the second I entered. They both straightened. I felt it in my bones, that feeling of being the third wheel in your own marriage. I told myself I was tired, that I was imagining things. But the unraveling had already begun. Caleb stopped asking for my input on decisions we always made together. He started making changes to the product line without showing me first. At meetings, he referred to the company as his vision, not ours, not mine, just his. And Tessa? She became his echo, repeating his ideas, reinforcing his instincts, positioning herself as the one who understood him, who supported his bigger picture. It was subtle at first, a quiet campaign, nothing loud or obvious, just a slow siphoning of credit, of closeness, of control. And because it wasn't a confrontation, I had no proof, just a growing ache in my chest and a deepening doubt in my gut. I started working more hours alone in the studio, sketching late into the night, trying to reconnect with the part of me that created before any of this existed. I needed to remind myself of who I was. I needed to believe I still had something of my own. But the truth was, I felt like a guest in my own home, a stranger in the company I helped build. Every time I saw Caleb and Tessa together, I felt smaller, invisible, like I was slowly being edited out of a story I had written. Even our dog started following Tessa more than me. There was one evening I remember clearly. It was raining. I stood in the doorway, watching Caleb and Tessa laughing in the kitchen. Her hand brushed his shoulder. His eyes lingered too long on her smile. I didn't say a word. I just turned and went upstairs, closed the door behind me, and sat on the floor until the sound of their laughter faded. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just felt hollow. People think betrayal happens in one swift, clean moment. A discovery, a confession, a final blow. But mine happened slowly, drip by drip, day by day. 100 small dismissals, 1,000 looks I wasn't meant to see. And I let it happen. Because I wanted to believe in them. In us. In the story we had spent years building. I told myself that Tessa wouldn't do that to me. That Caleb wasn't that kind of man. That I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew. The woman I used to be. Confident, grounded, visionary. She was slipping away. I had given everything to our business, to our marriage, to my family. And now I was being erased in the margins. No one shouted. No one slammed doors. They just closed them. Quietly. Repeatedly. Until I was left standing outside, wondering when I'd stopped being invited in. I didn't know it then, but the moment of truth was coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be quiet anymore. There's a difference between suspicion and proof. Suspicion eats at you quietly. It makes you question your memory, your instincts, your sanity. But proof? Proof shatters you in a single second. I didn't go looking for it. I didn't want to be that woman, the one checking receipts, analyzing tone, rereading text messages for hidden meanings. But when someone is erasing you in real time, you stop caring about how you look. You just want the truth, even if it ends you. The day I found out, I wasn't planning to. Caleb had left his work email open on our shared laptop. I hadn't touched it in weeks. We'd started drifting into separate routines, separate rooms, really. I used my tablet for work. But that morning, mine was dead, and I needed to check an invoice for a supplier. That's all I was doing. Until I saw the email. The subject line was simple. Thank you for your stay. From a boutique hotel in Seattle. I froze. Caleb hadn't mentioned staying anywhere fancy. He was supposed to be in a standard business suite. I clicked. Thank you for upgrading to our romance package. Complimentary champagne, late checkout, and chocolate-covered strawberries for 2. For 2. My stomach dropped, but I wasn't shocked. Not really. Somewhere in me, I already knew. I scrolled through the charges. A couple's massage, rooftop dinner, room service at midnight, 2 guests checked in, 1 room, 3 nights. I couldn't breathe. I closed the laptop and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. My heartbeat was too loud, my thoughts too sharp. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just sat there in silence, gripping the cushion beside me like it was the only thing keeping me from floating off the earth. I had given this man my best years, my trust, my vision. My name was on every corner of our company, from the earliest sketches to the final product. And he had taken it all and handed it to my sister like a gift she didn't earn. That night, I went into the guest house. I didn't knock. Tessa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't even look guilty. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions I already knew the answers to. I just stared at her. And she stared right back, calm, smug, almost bored. She shrugged. I wondered how long it would take you to figure it out. That was all she said. That was all she needed to say. There wasn't an apology. There wasn't regret. Just that same cold indifference she had carried her whole life. Like nothing was sacred. Like everything was hers if she wanted it badly enough. I left without saying a word. Caleb came home 2 hours later. I didn't confront him. I didn't ask for explanations. I simply told him I knew. His expression barely changed. He looked inconvenienced, like I had ruined something for him, like I was the problem now. He didn't deny it. He said something about how he and Tessa had connected over the stress of the business, how they hadn't meant for things to go this far, how I'd been distant, how I'd changed. I stood there, listening, nodding. My hands didn't shake, my eyes didn't water, because somewhere between the hotel receipt and Tessa's stare, a part of me had gone still. Not dead, just quiet, clear. It was over. I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten. I just packed a bag and left. Because sometimes the loudest decision you'll ever make is walking away without a fight, when you realize the people you've been fighting for were never fighting for you. I checked into a small hotel that night. Nothing fancy, just a room with clean sheets and a door I could lock from the inside. I laid on the bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I felt nothing, and everything. Grief, rage, embarrassment, but mostly freedom. Because now, at least, I had proof. No more questioning myself, no more doubting my gut, no more rewriting reality to make space for people who never made space for me. They had taken everything they could. But what they didn't know, what Caleb had forgotten, was that some things weren't theirs to take. And one of those things was in writing, legally binding, signed long before Tessa ever walked into our guest house with fake tears and a suitcase full of plans. They didn't know it yet, but they hadn't won. They'd just made a very big mistake. The night I moved out, I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. I lay awake on a stiff hotel mattress, my body unmoving but my mind racing, flashing through every moment, every red flag I had ignored. The laughter in the kitchen, the glances, the disappearances wrapped in business talk. They thought I had nothing left, but they forgot about the prenup. It was something Caleb had suggested himself years ago, when we were still young and idealistic. He said it was to protect both of us. Back then, we had no money, no assets, just ideas and dreams and the blind belief that we'd always be equal. I had signed it without hesitation. I hadn't thought about that document in years. Not until I remembered where I had stored it, in a fireproof box inside the lower drawer of our shared home office. And even though that house no longer felt like mine, I still had a key. The next morning, before anyone knew I was coming, I let myself in. It was early. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows betrayal, a stillness you can almost taste. Tessa's shoes were by the door. Caleb's jacket hung on the back of a chair. Everything looked the same, but everything had changed. I walked straight to the office. The drawer stuck at first. It always had. But when I pulled harder, it gave way. The fireproof box was still there, untouched. I opened it with shaky hands, half expecting the prenup to be gone, destroyed, replaced. But it wasn't. It was there, crisp, signed, notarized. I scanned it quickly, heart pounding. And then I saw it, the clause I had forgotten. The one Caleb had added with the guidance of our attorney, back when we were forming the company, a provision granting me majority creative control and 51% ownership of all design-related decisions, should there ever be a dispute. I remember how he had said it then. Your designs are what will make this company stand out. This protects your vision. He had meant it once, or at least I thought he had. Now it was the thing they had both overlooked. I stared at the paper, numb and focused all at once. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about payback. It was about reclaiming what I had built. The company had always been as much mine as his, maybe more, and this prenup proved it. I took a picture of every page. I folded the original and slipped it into my bag. Then I left. Not a single sound. Not a single word. Later that day, I made 2 calls. One to a new attorney, someone who specialized in complex divorce with business assets, and one to Zoe, my former design assistant, who had quietly resigned after I left. She answered on the first ring. "I've been waiting for this," she said. I met with the attorney the next morning. Her name was Claire Matthews, and from the moment she read the prenup, her demeanor shifted. "This changes everything," she said, running her finger across the ownership clause. "They've built a public image that erases you, but this document doesn't lie." Claire outlined what we needed: documentation of my contributions, proof of Caleb's attempts to cut me out, evidence of the company's current direction straying from its founding mission, my mission. It would take time, strategy, but it was all possible, and I was ready. For weeks, I worked in silence. While Tessa posted filtered photos from our former home and Caleb gave smug interviews about his creative process, I built my case. I reached out to former employees, vendors, clients who remembered my role, and little by little, a trail emerged. A trail of edits, omissions, lies. They hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, they had tried to erase me entirely. But in doing so, they got sloppy. They forgot the most dangerous kind of woman is the one they think is broken. I wasn't broken. I was building something stronger than before. This time, not out of love or hope, but out of clarity. They had taken so much, but they left behind the one thing that mattered most: proof. And proof is power. I planned the dinner without emotion. No trembling hands, no racing heart, just a cold, steady purpose. It was never meant to reconcile anything. It was a quiet stage, a controlled setting, a table where the truth could be served without raising a voice. I kept everything simple: the menu, the invitation, the tone. I made it sound casual, like closure. I knew they'd come. People like them never imagine they're walking into consequences. That morning, I walked through the front door of what used to be my home and noticed how little of me remained. The walls had been repainted, the furniture rearranged, the details overwritten. Tessa had left her fingerprints on everything, but the bones of the house were still mine. I had chosen the crown molding. I had refinished those floors on my knees for hours, sanding them until they glowed. She couldn't erase that. Not really. I moved through the kitchen methodically, pulling ingredients I knew by heart. Recipes I had once cooked when Caleb and I were still building everything, back when love and ambition lived in the same room. I let the scent of roasted lemon and herbs fill the air, not for nostalgia, but to remind myself what came before the rot. I had built this life from scratch, every corner of it. No matter who was currently playing host, I had written the first draft. I set the table slowly. The silverware gleamed. The plates were ceramic, hand-thrown by a local artisan I'd partnered with years ago. Everything was intentional. Every placement was part of the message. I wasn't hosting dinner. I was restoring order. They arrived as expected, together, confident, relaxed. I watched them move through the house like it belonged to them. I watched the way they looked at each other, the little gestures of ownership, of satisfaction. But I said nothing. I simply served the food and let them settle into the illusion that this was still their story. I didn't speak much during the meal. I let them fill the silence with talk of the company, of partnerships, of future campaigns. They spoke like rulers of a kingdom, forgetting the architect who had built the walls. I watched them talk around me, past me, as if I were a footnote in a narrative they had rewritten. But I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to be remembered. When the meal ended, I cleared the plates with quiet precision. I moved through the kitchen one final time before reaching into my bag and retrieving the folder. I placed it on the table in front of them. Not with drama, just gravity. Inside was the prenup, the one Caleb had written, signed, and filed before our first check ever cleared. the one that gave me 51% creative and operational control over our shared business, the one they had forgotten or thought I had. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. I let them open it, let their eyes track across the lines of legal truth, let the silence shift from comfortable to stunned. I remained standing, watching the weight of reality drop like lead into the room. That document had slept in a drawer for years, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be respected. It was my name, my designs, my rights, protected on paper long before Tessa ever showed up with her calculated charm and empty praise. There was no yelling, no outbursts, just the suffocating stillness that follows the moment you realize you've lost. They didn't speak. They didn't challenge it. There was nothing they could say. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had underestimated me. I didn't need to make a speech. My presence was enough. The folder said everything I didn't. They knew what was coming next. Legal pressure, structural reversals, a complete reclamation of what they had tried to steal. And they knew I had every right to take it. When I walked out, I didn't look back. The air felt cleaner outside the house. Colder, too, but honest. That night, I didn't replay the dinner in my head. I didn't need to. It had served its purpose. I had sat at the same table where I was erased and made myself undeniable again. Power doesn't vanish in a thunderclap. It dissolves quietly, like smoke curling from a candle just blown out. That's how it began for them. Not with a scandal or a headline, but with a silence they couldn't control. After the dinner, I didn't issue threats. I didn't post statements. I simply handed the documents to my attorney and waited. The prenup, the ownership clause, the original filings, all of it, clean and legal. My lawyer moved quickly. Letters were sent. Disclosures were demanded. The company's board was notified. The first to respond wasn't Caleb. It was one of the investors, a woman I had once pitched to with sweaty palms and trembling hands in a cafe, back when our chairs didn't match and the office was a garage. She remembered me. She remembered my designs. She had assumed I'd stepped away voluntarily. When she saw the documents, her tone changed. She called me personally. She said she felt misled. She wasn't the only one. News travels fast in the business world, but what travels faster is doubt. And once it started circulating that the foundation of Caleb's version of the company was compromised, the dominoes began to fall. Slowly, at first, an article appeared in a design trade journal, neutral in tone, but pointed in content. It questioned the shift in aesthetic direction. It noted the decline in material quality. It mentioned internal legal disputes surrounding creative ownership. My name wasn't listed, but I felt its presence between every line. Tessa began retreating from public appearances. Her carefully curated image started to crack. No more behind-the-scenes photos at the studio. No more smiling selfies with her team. I heard whispers that clients were canceling meetings, that suppliers were asking questions, that a few longtime employees had submitted resignation letters. I kept my distance. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I watched, and I remembered everything. Caleb, meanwhile, tried to hold the illusion together. He doubled down on branding. He pushed press releases about future collections and expansion plans. He tightened control over the messaging, but it didn't work. The silence around my return was more powerful than any words he could release, because people noticed, people who knew the real story, people who had been part of our early days, the designers, the carpenters, the interns who had stayed late helping us paint walls and package orders. They began to reach out, quietly. Some offered support, others offered evidence, emails, photos, contracts, screenshots. Every piece was another thread in the web Caleb and Tessa had spun too carelessly. I started documenting everything, every public claim they made, every change in the product line, every expense reported in company filings. My attorney was methodical. I was patient. I had no interest in revenge. I wanted restoration. Meanwhile, my days were quiet. I worked from a temporary office I had set up in the back of a friend's design studio. Nothing fancy, just white walls, a table, and a chair. But the first time I opened my sketchbook again, something shifted. My hands moved without force. My mind slowed, and the ideas began to return. It was like breathing again after weeks underwater. Designing had always been my language, my calm, my power. Tessa had taken my house, my husband, my title, but she hadn't taken that. She couldn't. And with every pencil stroke, I felt a little more whole. I didn't talk about the company publicly. I didn't answer reporters. I didn't respond to gossip. I let the document speak. I let the consequences unfold naturally. The louder they had tried to be, the more powerful my silence became. Because people don't forget authenticity. They don't forget who built something with care and purpose. They may be distracted for a while by flashier voices and prettier lies, but they remember where it started. And with every crack in Caleb's story, more people looked back and saw me standing at the beginning. Not loud, not broken, just still standing. It's one thing to know the truth. It's another to watch the world finally catch up to it. By the time the board meeting was scheduled, the tone had shifted. Calls that once went unanswered were now returned promptly. Emails opened with words like clarification, reassessment, and governance. People who once looked past me were now looking directly at me and wondering how they ever believed Caleb's version. My attorney handled most of the formalities. She was deliberate, calm, clinical. But I attended the meeting myself. I didn't want to hear it secondhand. I didn't want summaries. I wanted to be in the room when the reckoning began. It wasn't held at company headquarters. Too public, too exposed. They chose a neutral office in a downtown high-rise, glass and steel, sterile and forgettable. I sat at the table, across from faces I hadn't seen in almost a year. A few looked surprised to see me there. One or two looked relieved. Caleb entered last. He didn't make eye contact. The meeting began with a review of recent company performance, numbers, trends, projections. All carefully packaged, but the damage was visible. Margins were shrinking. Product returns had tripled. Social engagement had dropped by nearly 40%. Retail partners had begun to pull back. And it hadn't gone unnoticed. Then came the matter of ownership. The documents were clear. The prenup was valid. The incorporation papers showed the structure Caleb had conveniently omitted in every interview and investor update. The 51% voting rights weren't symbolic. They were active. And the board had a legal responsibility to recognize them. No one argued. Not loudly, at least. Caleb's legal team tried to raise concerns about the optics of the shift. They spoke of brand confusion, of market volatility, of investor confidence. But their words fell flat. There's only so much you can spin when the paperwork doesn't lie. When the vote was called, it wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. I was reinstated with full voting control and temporary operational authority pending formal leadership review. Caleb was removed from day-to-day decision-making. His access to sensitive financial systems was suspended. The board would monitor the transition closely. Tessa wasn't mentioned. She didn't need to be. Her name wasn't on any legal document. Her role had never been official, no matter how loudly she'd played it. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway and stood there for a long time. The city moved outside the glass, cars, people, horns, life. But inside me, everything was still. Not peaceful, not yet, but still. This wasn't triumph. It was recovery. Later that week, I visited the company headquarters for the first time since I had been pushed out. The lobby felt colder than I remembered. The art on the walls had changed. The receptionist was new. But the bones of the building were the same, just like the company. Reshaped, yes. Misused, but not broken. I walked the production floor. I visited the studio. Some of the original team was still there, older, wearier, but loyal. I didn't make speeches. I didn't announce returns. I asked questions. I listened. I took notes. Trust doesn't come back with signatures. It comes back with presence. There was still damage to assess, relationships to rebuild, products to pull, decisions to reverse. But I could feel it, quietly underneath everything, the beginning of return. Not to what it was, to what it always should have been. Meanwhile, Caleb disappeared from public view. There were no more interviews, no social media posts. He withdrew privately, like a man bracing for the echo after the collapse. And Tessa? She vanished entirely. I heard rumors about tension between them, about investors backing out, about unpaid invoices and burned bridges. But I didn't follow the details. That wasn't my story anymore. My story was here. In every blueprint I had drawn, in every craftsman who still used the techniques I had taught them, in every customer who had chosen our work because they felt something real in the design. The company was mine again, not because I fought for it, but because I never stopped building it, even when they tried to write me out. Healing doesn't arrive like a miracle. It doesn't come with trumpets or grand realizations. It comes slowly, on quiet mornings, in small decisions that don't make headlines. It comes when you stop expecting to feel whole overnight and instead begin piecing yourself back together one silent moment at a time. After the board's decision, I didn't celebrate. I didn't pop champagne or call friends. I walked back to my small apartment, the one I'd rented after everything collapsed, and stood in the center of that unfamiliar space until the sun dipped below the window pane. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow and unsteady, like someone stepping off a boat after a storm, technically on land, but still swaying inside. The first thing I did was rest, not in the superficial way that people mean when they say they're taking a break. I mean real, intentional stillness. I slept without setting alarms. I turned off notifications. I let myself eat slowly without multitasking. I gave myself permission to do nothing because doing everything had broken me. My body had been running on adrenaline for months, and once the immediate battle was over, the crash was sharp. I experienced what I later recognized as emotional whiplash. My mind kept waiting for another betrayal, another ambush, another moment of erasure. But it didn't come. The silence was real now. And in that silence, I finally heard myself again. I returned to my sketchbook. Not because I had a deadline, but because my fingers itched for something honest. I started with simple shapes. No pressure, no product line. Just lines and shadows and movement. And little by little, something emerged. Not just a design, a language. One I had nearly forgotten how to speak. The lines were bolder than before. Less ornamental, more grounded. My work had changed. It had hardened and deepened, like I had. There was a quiet strength in the curves, a deliberate weight in the structure. I wasn't designing furniture anymore. I was designing reflection. I was telling my story without words. Meanwhile, the company was still mine, but it didn't feel familiar. It had been reshaped in my absence, culturally, creatively, structurally. I didn't rush to reverse everything. That wasn't the point. It wasn't about burning down what had been built in my name. It was about excavating what was still good and bringing it back to life. I met privately with every department head. I listened. I asked what had changed, what had hurt, what they missed. Most were cautious at first. Some were openly skeptical. But eventually, the walls began to lower. And in those conversations, I began to understand the damage Caleb's leadership had caused, not just in the numbers, but in the spirit of the people. Designers had stopped feeling safe to experiment. Craft teams had been pressured to cut corners. Ethical sourcing was replaced with cheaper, faster options. Values were sacrificed in the name of scale. But underneath the disillusionment, there was still belief. Fragile, buried belief that what we once stood for could exist again. I didn't make sweeping declarations. I didn't promise transformation overnight. I simply began to show up every day, same time, same room, same questions. And in time, the team began to respond. Not with applause, but with presence, with effort, with trust. Rebuilding trust is harder than reclaiming ownership. Trust isn't signed, it's earned. And I had to prove that I wasn't just there to reclaim a title, but to restore a mission. I reinstated our commitment to sustainable materials and fair labor sourcing. I reached out to vendors who had been pushed away and asked what it would take to rebuild the relationships. I reviewed every new product line and identified what could be saved, what needed to go, and what would never carry my name again. The company's name stayed for now, but I knew that would change. Caleb's surname didn't belong on work that no longer had his fingerprints. My legal team quietly began preparing for a rebrand. Something personal, something rooted in who I was, not who I had married. Outside of work, I began therapy for the first time, not just to process the betrayal, but to unearth the patterns that led me to tolerate it for so long. I had spent years diminishing myself for the sake of harmony. I had internalized the idea that being loved meant being quiet, being accommodating, being small. Therapy forced me to ask why. The answers were uncomfortable, but liberating. I had grown up learning to survive in the shadow of a sister who took whatever she wanted and a mother who told me to just be the bigger person. I had learned that peace was more important than boundaries, that silence was safer than confrontation, but those lessons had nearly erased me, and now I was unlearning them, actively, imperfectly, honestly. I reconnected with people I had pushed away during the worst of it. Friends who had sensed the storm before I admitted it to myself. Friends who had left messages I never returned, who had shown up at my door only to be turned away. I didn't ask them for forgiveness. I just showed up, with time, with consistency, with presence. Some relationships healed, others didn't. That's part of the cost of betrayal. Not everyone stays, not everyone should. But the ones who remained reminded me of who I had always been, before the company, before the fall. A year after the board's vote, I stood in our newly remodeled flagship studio. The walls had been repainted, the lighting softened. The display tables, custom-built from salvaged oak, were filled with the first full collection I had created since taking back the company. Every piece told a part of my story, not directly, but through form, texture, balance. I watched visitors walk through the space, pausing, admiring, touching the grain with their fingertips. I didn't introduce myself. I didn't need to. The work spoke. That night, I sat alone in my office and opened a letter I had written to myself months earlier, but never sent. It was a reminder of what it took to come back, of the woman who packed a suitcase and walked away from everything familiar, not to escape, but to preserve what mattered. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, deep and steady, because I had made it through, not untouched, but intact. Before you read on, if my journey has touched something in you, if you've ever rebuilt your life from the ashes of betrayal, please subscribe to this channel now. Your courage matters. Your story matters. Restoration isn't dramatic. It doesn't explode with fireworks or make headlines. It arrives quietly, in between moments, in small daily decisions that gradually redefine who you are. Chapter 10 isn't about loud victory or twisted justice. It's about softness, power, and the quiet reclaiming of your soul. I didn't announce my return. I gently slipped back into my own story. Once the board's vote passed and Blake Designs became mine again, I didn't parachute back in. I returned slowly, at first simply by going back to the studio. I wandered through spaces still filled with memories, tools I'd once chosen, samples I'd personally approved, sketches pinned to walls that still whispered ideas. Every surface I touched grounded me further. Every step reminded me that this, our work, our vision, our values, had always been mine. 6 months later, I filed the paperwork to officially rename the company. Blake Designs wasn't about erasure. It was about renewal. It placed my name, my creative heartbeat, at the center. It wasn't petty revenge. It was respectful redefinition. I didn't host a huge launch. Instead, I curated an intimate showing in our flagship studio. Cream walls, natural light, simple pedestals showing a carefully selected collection, modular shelving with reclaimed wood, a refined table line with natural finishes, upholstery in muted tones reflective of the raw beauty of natural dyes. I watched people walk through. They didn't admire devices. They paused. They connected. They recognized intention in every curve. A customer lingered by a shelf and traced the grain with her fingertips, as though leaning into the story behind the piece. Others stood quietly, absorbing the care in each line. It mattered. Visibility without spectacle. This was the quiet takeover of meaning, one slow breath at a time. Leadership followed. Measured, considerate, inclusive. I didn't fix every staffing error instantly. I invited those who remained to help rebuild what had been tarnished. I elevated voices that Caleb had drowned out. I created a mentorship initiative connecting young designers, especially women stepping back into their power after setbacks. I designed the program so those entering the industry had a safe landing and intentional navigation, something I didn't have. Rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past. It was about anchoring new roots. I hired a mix of seasoned artisans and fresh graduates. I brought back suppliers I had worked with years ago, ethical, sustainable, craft-focused. Some doors stayed closed, and that was fine. Forgiveness wasn't required for the brand to move forward. The days were not glamorous. There were budget meetings, production snags, shipping delays, reminders that revival is operational, not poetic. But each solved challenge turned into belief again. Trust from clients, confidence from retailers, strengthened relationships with media and partners. I also honored the emotional repair. Therapy wasn't optional. I revisited the root of my silence, my comfort in conceding. I uncovered patterns embedded in childhood, the tendency to minimize, accommodate, stay small, worthy of unlearning. I revisited people I had hurt, friends I shut out when I fell, family members I turned away when grief came. I didn't demand forgiveness. I just showed up again. Some doors remained closed. Some friends forgave. That showed me which relationships mattered. I realized closure wasn't revenge. It was alignment. My mother visited the new studio. The light shifted the dust. She paused, fingers resting lightly on the edge of a table I had designed. The recognition in her eyes broke me open. For healing, not heartbreak. Tessa tried to reach out at one point. A message full of passive regret. It didn't matter. I let it disappear unread. I didn't need closure through others. I had closure in regaining my voice in full color. Early fiscal returns showed the shift wasn't sentimental. People were investing in substance again. Buyers gravitated toward our authenticity. Sales were steady and rising, not explosive, but rooted. That quiet, steady growth felt stronger than anything hyperbolic. I wrote a letter to my younger self, sealed it, and tucked it into a drawer. It said, "You did it. Not because you were loud, because you stayed, because you continued designing, healing, believing in what was true." I didn't need to read it a second time. Its power already carried me home. At the end of the year, I hosted a small gathering. Not a party, but a ritual of gratitude. A few team members, designers, the mentor intuitive graduates, and my mother. No speeches, just presence. Art on the walls. Quiet acknowledgement of everything we gained through intentional healing. Blake Designs thrived, but differently. We weren't fastest growing. We weren't trend chasing. We were thoughtful, authentic, resilient. We survived. We rebuilt. Outside of work, I carried freedom into the rest of life. I started boxing class, not to fight anyone, but to feel my body move with intention. I booked travel I had postponed, because part of healing is seeing sunlight again, visiting places unapologetically, healing in sunlight. My heart was still healing. Trust was still growing. But silent reclamation was powerful on its own. I understood that the real CEO of your life is not the person who steals your dream. It's the person who wakes up one day and quietly rebuilds. The person who names themselves again, not in rebellion, but in return. If you have ever thought your best chapters passed you by, know that they don't need fanfare to matter. They need fidelity to your values, to your vision, to yourself. Thank you for being here, for listening. If this chapter felt like your own, consider subscribing. Share this story with someone who taught others to forget and needs to remember how truth rewrites itself. Because the greatest freedom isn't in revenge, it's in becoming the author of your own light again.